Hello and welcome to the CBMM and Partners Mobility Leadership Debate. The mobility sector is undergoing radical change and transformation. Automotive product makers and mobility service providers are responding to heightened challenges, new demands, new technologies and new players in the marketplace. Increasing electrification, the development and introduction of autonomous and AI, and a drive for sustainable technologies are all increasingly important drivers of this change. And in this changing landscape, innovation and new partnerships are key to meeting future needs and building sustainable businesses within this dynamic and exciting mobility sector. Today I'm joined by a number of recognized leaders driving and responding to these changes to discuss mobility innovations. And I suppose the biggest mobility innovation that we think of is autonomous mobility. So I'm going to chuck this out there. Alexander, 2050, what percentage of cars do you think are going to be, or vehicles, are going to be autonomous?
Yeah, our focus at Exos is really specifically on commercial vehicles. So I'll let some of the other panelists talk a little bit more about passenger car, but for commercial vehicles, you're going to see a big push from insurance companies, a big push from the fleets themselves for an improved experience, a safer experience for their drivers. So integrating levels of autonomy, level 3 and level 4 autonomy with advanced driver assistance is something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to, by 2050, we anticipate that all vehicles will have elements of this, but to remove the driver completely from the truck is something that there's still a lot of work to be done. So I would be less bullish on removing the driver completely from that experience.
Lucas, as the ultimate driver, one of the greatest drivers in the world, what are your thoughts on a driverless future?
On commercial vehicles, for sure. In motorsport, I think we'll see still a lot of the sport in a very manual way. So which everybody wants to know which is the best driver, regardless of which autonomous systems we have. But on complementing what he said is very interesting, because I think in the same way as he said about insurance pushing the logistics and the trucks and the vans to have automation helping the driver make the transport safer for everybody. I think the same with hypercars and supercars. I think in the near future there will be mandatory, if you buy a car with 1,000 horsepower, that there will be systems that could be as either a driver coach or a system that will help you to extract the maximum out of this hypercar. Because to be honest, 99.9% of people who buy those cars have no clue about how to exploit the power that they produce or the grip level that they produce. So we with RoboRace is exactly what we're doing. We are developing, we believe also that the human and the AI together will be much more strong than the AI racing by itself or running by itself. And we think about the high end of the spectrum of vehicle dynamics, high speeds, a lot of power with automation, which is complementary of that.
Tom, could you outline where autonomous is now and how it's going to develop, not just for passenger vehicles, but for other mobility forms and needs?
Sure, yeah. So, well, we're all aware roughly where autonomy is now. There are cars with kind of level 2, 3, that kind of ballpark. We're seeing a little more in the kind of commercial space. We're seeing, Volvo and a couple of the other manufacturers pushing autonomous trucks for bounded areas like mines. Komatsu has some for mining as well. So that's kind of where we are today. We're still at very early stages. Will we get there by 2050? Probably. But I think not just cars and vehicles, I think we'll also start to see a shift to drones and flying in autonomous drones. The technology for that is being developed today, and it will actually be easier to deploy that in many areas, many regions, than it will be to deploy level 5 autonomous cars, because they don't require the same level of high definition mapping. And when you ask about transportation for other things, not just moving people around, but yeah, Alex has mentioned commercial trucking, but also if you think about deliveries. So, for example, Nuro have done deals with Kroger, who are a large US retailer, and also with Domino's Pizzas, if I remember correctly. A couple of weeks ago they announced that, to do little delivery, not trucks, little delivery vehicles that aren't big enough to carry a human. So you get out, say, your Kroger app and you order your groceries, and the groceries are put into this little delivery vehicle, and it autonomously delivers them to your front door. And the idea there is the transportation cost is close to zero because there's no driver to pay. There's very little fuel, very little maintenance, and these little devices go on forever. They have a long lifetime. So transportation costs are coming to zero. And of course, when transportation costs come to zero, you get all kinds of implications for things that can happen. An example I like to use is Starbucks. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't know anyone working in Starbucks, but it's very likely that something like this could happen. You open up your Starbucks application on your phone, you order your grande latte or whatever it is in the morning, and a Starbucks delivery vehicle delivers it to your door. And it then offers you a lift to work. Because why not? Because the cost of transportation is close to zero. It doesn't cost Starbucks anything to do that. It's an additional service they can give you built into the cost of your grande latte. And then when you're in this vehicle, they can upsell you on croissants or granola bars or donuts or whatever else it is. And you know, it's not just Starbucks. You can think of many different new business models that can come out of the shift to autonomy in transportation.
And what do we mean when we're talking levels 4 to 5? What sort of physically is that difference?
So the main difference between level 4 and level 5 is in level 5 it's completely fully autonomous. You need no driver whatsoever. Level 4 you still need a driver to step in at certain situations, particularly in urban environments.
Right, okay. Yehudi, what are the challenges in building a new innovative brand and belief in a new product in a market where the customers, you know, they like what they have?
Do you think they like what they have? Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Well, that's no, but that's the question. That's the question.
Now it's not so that people don't want to change. We are a brand, Urban Arrow, building cargo bikes, and we have difficulty in keeping up with production because the demand is so high. So people do want to change, and they think about new ways of transportation. And it's quite obvious maybe if you think about the environment, if you think about health, if you think about congestion here in New York streets.
Air quality.
Air quality, and also driving a bike creates a smile on your face. So it's not that people don't want to use new ways of transportation or new products, not at all. It seems more the other way that producers of components, they are a little bit slow. We feel that they could innovate much quicker. Okay. And they seem to stick to their old products.
Alex, you're nodding along with that.
Yeah, I think that's true. In some of the heavier vehicle sectors as well, the supply push is still very nascent, where the demand is there. You see that with electric vehicles. We have customers left and right asking us for the savings, the maintenance-free aspect of electric vehicles, but the supply chain is only now kind of catching up to that.
Well, Rodrigo, on that point, what are the technical demands in designing and producing high-performance autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, we have a demand that is a good case in our operation that can reduce the cost and also can bring better reality as well. But we see in the materials point of view, we can help in terms of, improve the safety and also bring some technology. So we've been working as well in the future of sensors, how can help this to the autonomous driving. We are learning with big OEMs as well, how we can implement it in our facilities and also how can we develop products together. We have been talking as well with RoboRace because they have a very good background on this, how we can cooperate. So we see that autonomous can improve the safety and also together in combination with better materials can be a good case solution.
Lucas, as well as doing RoboRace, as Rodrigo said, and being a Formula E driver, you also have a company to design and produce electric bikes and scooters. Why and how does micro-mobility fit into the new mobility landscape?
I was just gonna say exactly the same what they agreed on. The bike, we 2 years ago, we made a completely new bike out of steel niobium for the first time with integrated batteries inside the frame and it's a small different philosophy with magnetic region rear brakes and to enter the low-cost market, but we could not find suppliers to match what we needed. Either they asked for a huge volume, which we didn't have it yet, to modify their production, or we could not find the right parts. So we struggled with production. We basically made 200 handmade ones, and we are still struggling to actually match the supply and demand to make something which is feasible. But I agree completely. I'm a racing driver, I love cars, but I think for a dense urban environments like Sao Paulo, where I'm from, or New York, the tendency is for this to be pushed for smaller, lighter vehicles, either autonomous small drones that will be small enough not to be not to have a human inside, or to deliver a pizza or pharmaceuticals or anything, or if there is a human, then small vehicles like a bike or like a scooter, electric scooters, or small. So we believe on that as well. So yes, I think this is the direction of highly populated cities.
So is that lack of availability of parts, is that holding back the whole industry at the moment, the whole sector?
I think
if all of you guys are struggling?
I think in a lot of ways it's a chicken and the egg situation. You've got, as customers begin to adopt and begin to accept and begin to wrap their minds around an electric future, you have suppliers that are kind of ramping up tentatively, but ramping up to meet that demand. And I think we're kind of right at that inflection point where in the last 5 years, battery supply, for example, has increased tenfold. Battery prices subsequently have come down 80% in the last 8 years. So you have kind of right, we're at that inflection point where the supply base is growing, the price is reflecting that growing supply base, and customers are now starting to adopt. And you see that in places like Norway, where 40% of all new vehicles are EVs. You're starting to see that demand, and we're kind of just right at that inflection point where the supply base is just catching up to customer demand.
Anyone today who wants to buy an EV, an electric car, they know that there's a supply issue, because you go to order an electric vehicle and you've got a waiting time of a couple of months typically for an electric vehicle, because they're supply constrained, because typically it's the batteries are the issue for the manufacturers. But that is going to change enormously. I saw a forecast this morning, there's 91 mega factories for batteries for electric vehicles being retooled or being built out between now and 2028, if I remember correctly. So 91 mega factories being built out between now and 2028 to meet the demand that is coming. Even if you look just at Volkswagen are currently retooling 16 of their factories to build electric vehicles. They are bringing out 33 models of electric vehicles between now and 2023. That's 4 years' time. They're going to have 33 models of electric vehicles for sale.
That's astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow, that's remarkable. So that's in the sort of more personal market. What about the commercial market, Alex? What are the sort of differences in there compared to your sort of everyday car?
Yeah. So for passenger cars, when you're selling an EV, you're selling an experience. It's sleek, it's sexy, it's fun, and it makes you feel good because you're helping the environment. For commercial vehicles, ultimately, you're selling savings. You're selling an easier way of doing business. You're selling a cheaper way of doing business. And commercial vehicles historically were prevented from really kind of capturing those savings because, just like we just talked about, the supply base wasn't there for the components, things like the inverters, the motors, kind of the heavier duty components of the powertrain. And most importantly, the battery was so much more expensive than it is today. Again, that the battery prices come down 80% just since 2010. So those two mitigating factors really prevented large-scale adoption of commercial EVs, but we've in many ways kind of come over the hump on that, partly because of what Tesla's done for the battery. It's driven the cost of battery down dramatically. And what the transit sector, companies like Proterra and the e-buses in China are driving down the cost and increasing the availability of those heavy-duty electric motors that you can apply into commercial electric vehicles. So we've kind of overcome those initial technology hurdles. The next hurdle will ultimately be finding the right routes that range anxiety and charging are no longer an issue for these trucks. The vast majority of commercial vehicles drive in the United States on shorter routes where you return to base each night. 60 to 70% of trucks in the US drive on those routes of about 150 miles or less, where they return to base every night. We think of trucking as LA to New York, these big giant trucks that drive, you've got the trucker blowing the horn, but in actuality, the majority of trucks drive on these short haul routes. And for those routes, EV is ready to help those fleet owners save money today.
Savings are important, but not always is it the case that if you change a fan for a cargo bike, you're cheaper. But for our customers, commercial customers, the image is always also very important. They want to be the first in their segment to drive electric, to start using new means of transportation.
And how that must be a big part of your sort of plan to take a small business from Holland and turn it into like a sustainable global business.
Yes, of course. Being from Holland, we are a bit proud. We think that Holland is the center of logistics in Europe. And we think Holland is a country of innovation. And Holland is known for the bicycles. So that brings us one step ahead already. And then talking about steps, we think about doing business one step at a time. So we could grow much faster than we do actually. But we just enter new markets when we feel we are completely ready for it. We have sales taken care of, logistics, and service. And service is a real important part of the deal. So we just go country by country, step by step.
Okay. Fascinating stuff. Alex, apart from XOS, who are innovators in the commercial EV space, and what kind of interesting partnerships are?
Of course, my friends from Holland. No, it is actually interesting, not to kind of beat a dead horse, but we go back to the supply issue, and it's really interesting what in the last 12 months has happened. You had major global players like Dana make huge forays into this sector. Dana recently acquired TM4, made a big investment into a company called Hyliion that are doing a lot of work in making heavier duty components of the EV powertrain accessible to commercial customers. You also have companies like Meritor, Allison who recently acquired Axletech's powered axle division. A lot of these big component manufacturers are staking their claim, are making big plays into that part of the value chain. And it's interesting because the last 4 or 5 decades, each of those players has had a very defined role as to what they play. Allison does transmissions. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows what each of those companies does. And going forward, it's less clear who's going to own batteries, it's the OEM, who's going to own the motor, who's going to own the components and the software that goes into these vehicles. The value chain is much less clear. So it's really exciting to see what's going on behind the scenes. Whereas a lot of the big OEMs, the companies like the Volvos, the Daimlers of the world are also making really exciting moves, but are doing so a little bit more tentatively. They're not necessarily kind of making these vertical integration decisions that companies like Tesla are, where they're owning the entire landscape from battery cell all the way up to final delivered product. The Daimlers and Volvos of the world are still trying to figure out what parts of those value chain they want to own.
Tom, there's much talk about mobility last mile solutions. Why is this important, and what developments can we expect to see, and who might be the leaders in that area?
God knows is probably the short answer to that, to be honest. The last mile micro-mobility section is really confused at the moment, or it's a really confusing landscape. We're seeing all kinds of things happening there. We've seen the scooters, and scooters is an unfortunate word in English because it can mean either a little thing like a Vespa that you sit on and go along with that, or it can mean one of these things you stand on, like one of the Lime or Bird kick scooters, which are now electric. So those are happening in different places and at different rates. I live in the south of Spain, and there are very few of those kind of kick scooters there. What you're seeing more of there is the electric scooters, the sit-on ones, like the Vespas. And there's several companies rolling those out there. And then you see in places like India, the little tuk-tuks, the little three-wheeler things, those are starting to go electric big time now at about a rate of about 11,000 new electric ones a week. And it's because of cost reasons, because it's much cheaper to run those on electricity than it is to run them on petrol. And of course, that's great for noise pollution, it's great for air pollution, it's great for the drivers because it's a lot cheaper, and it's great for things like the railway stations, which is often typically where they operate from, because the railway stations now have a new source of revenue because they put chargers in the railway station so that the drivers can charge the tuk-tuks while they're waiting for the passengers to come on the trains.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff. Rodrigo, safety is an issue, not only in our cities but also in rural areas, and not only for driverless vehicles but also for this last mile micro-mobility we're talking about. What role can advanced materials play in delivering safer mobility?
One thing that we've been working quite a lot, for example, is the discussion and questions that raised to us, okay, in the future when we're gonna reach level 5, so the car can be made by paper. And then we do not believe that, because we see still a brand behind that. You still have to protect the consumer. For sure, the combination with better material, advanced materials with AI and also autonomous driving can be a very good combination to reduce fatality. So we've been playing quite a lot in regions like South America, China, and India, how we can reduce the fatalities in the world. And one of the matter is how to improve the material, real material in cars, trucks, buses, and also in bikes. And also creating the mindset of the consumer driving better, have a better way of driving and the way that they react in the streets. This is challenge. It's really challenge. When we see Brazil, a lot of people is dying every year. India and China is the same. We believe really strong the material can help on this. If you see crash tests, sometimes you see a comparison of the same car in Europe and US. When you compare to Brazil, it's like it's 5-star in Europe and 0-star in Brazil. And it's the way the guys know how to do it. It's just a matter of transfer knowledge and improve at that. So it's how the materials I see can improve safety.
And safety is obviously going to be the big question, isn't it, with autonomous cars? How do you even start to do you think, to deal with the whole responsibility kind of side of things?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I think it was in 2015 the CEO of Volvo said that if an autonomous Volvo has an accident, that Volvo will assume responsibility. And I think that was a very brave thing of him to say. And I think it tells where the direction the market has to go. It tells that, you know, if cars are level 5, fully autonomous, then the responsibility for any accident has to lie with the manufacturer, not with the person sitting in the car, who are just sitting in the car and not driving, by definition.
Yeah.
I think it'll come. I think a time will come when we do get to level 5 that if you do own a car, which many people won't at that point, but if you do own a car and you ring your insurance company and you say, no, I want to drive the car myself, they'll go, well, that's this whole other policy, clunk, you know, which will be far more expensive. So it's the insurance landscape is going to change dramatically when we get to level 5. We'll also have, you know, pay as you drive and pay how you drive insurance because the cars are connected. So that, you know, for me, pay as you drive would be fantastic because I drive about 10,000 kilometers a year, whereas my neighbor drives about 1,000 kilometers a week. So, you know, and we pay roughly the same insurance, which makes 0 sense. But on the other hand, pay how you drive, which is, you know, based on your acceleration and your braking and your cornering and that kind of thing, which is possible to do now as well because the cars are connected. That would be terrible for me because I have an electric car. And
oh, okay, not because you're a terrible driver.
No, it's because I have an electric car, and because I have an electric car, I really enjoy putting my foot down and driving it really, really fast. And so, you know, the two things would probably level out. So be net 0.
Interesting. Any thoughts on that sort of side of autonomous?
Yeah, I mean, the point made earlier about jumping from level 4 to level 5 is really the big challenge. If you think about the different levels of autonomy, level 3 and 4 are very similar in that there are advanced driver assistance programs, things like lane avoidance, lane keeping, collision avoidance. Those things, the technology hurdles to get there are solved or are being solved right now, and they're rapidly being introduced into trucks. You see a ton of different startups that are integrating those components into trucks and into passenger vehicles. You see stories about the guy, you know, reading a newspaper while driving a Tesla on the 101 in California. Those things are happening today, but the kind of the moral quandaries, the higher level conceptual issues that we face going from level 4, where somebody's sitting behind the wheel and maybe they're watching Netflix, maybe they're reading a newspaper, but they're still at the wheel, to go from that to turning my truck, car, whatever it is, into kind of a sofa that happens to have 4 wheels is a totally different question, and there are major concerns with that. You have to figure out how to make sure that vehicle can talk to all other vehicles in the same language, and not only all other vehicles, all other objects that might be in the way, in the road. So again, on the commercial side, we're pretty hesitant to see a world where, in the near future, where a driver is completely removed from the vehicle. Their role will decrease year after year, and the experience will improve year after year. Trucking, especially, that's a huge issue where driver retention is abysmal. It's one of the top 2 or 3 issues every year for fleets. How do you keep drivers in their seats, because it's not a fun thing to do on a day-to-day basis? And integrating levels of autonomy will improve that. So their jobs will get better, the jobs will get easier. So many of those issues will be addressed incrementally, but to go from driver to no driver behind the steering wheel is still, you know, a huge mountain to climb.
Lucas, as far as tech transfer is concerned, you race for Audi in Formula E. How close is that relationship between race and road?
Motorsport has always been very linked to road development. That was true to combustion engines on the 60s, 70s, 80s, turbocharged, brake discs, a lot of safety features, seat belts were invented either on the defense industry, then brought to commercial vehicles, or in a racetrack. And as we are discussing, the next level of, the next step towards mobility will be the electrification of systems and then the automation of systems just after that. And it's a big question how motorsport fits in. And of course, the electrification is very clear. Formula E was developed in perfect timing in 2012, which I raced from the beginning. For me, it was very clear that motorsport had to have an electric professional series. There is a lot of technology now that has been developed in racing that we are taking to the commercial vehicle. For example, very efficient regeneration techniques. When you put just a simple fact, but for example, if you have a very efficient regeneration, the mass of the vehicle, so how much it weighs, does not take in consideration how much energy it uses. It's basically a function of aerodynamics and friction, basically.
Yeah.
The rest does not take, which is not true into combustion. Because imagine that you have a very heavy car and you go up and you go down, you can regenerate as much energy as you spend to go up and down. So this technique of a very efficient in Formula E, we produce power and regenerate in a level of almost 95 and sometimes over 95% of efficiency, which is extreme. Another thing which is very interesting is because of the technical rules of Formula E, there is a lot of offline types of programs we have to develop to make sure that the car has, let's say, a good ABS systems or traction control or stuff like this, which cannot be online. So you don't need, with electric, because it's so precise, you can every millisecond basically calculates where the MGU is, where the motor is. There's a lot of ways of creating systems in a more efficient and cheaper way that could be transferred to the car, to the road car. And this is very fascinating for me. I was in F1 before. Now I see a very small link between an F1 and a road car. I think an F1 is much more close to the SpaceX rocket than actually to a conventional A3 on the road, which does not mean that they don't have a future. They have in a different way. But Formula E is very relevant to today's technology, how we develop. In 10 years, I don't really know. We are already at 95, 96, 97% efficiency. It doesn't matter how much you invest, it's never going to get to 100.
Yeah.
So, it is important that we are in the same direction as a commercial vehicle. It's very important.
In Robo Race, you see the same?
Robo Race is a very different story. As we've been discussing now for the last hour, each segment requires a specific way of being developed. So are the future going to lie on computer vision and LiDARs, or you need GPS, or you need a yaw positioning of the car when it's sliding, which is the case of RoboCase, which you're talking about very specific vehicle dynamics. We are doing Robo Race because nobody at the moment is doing autonomy at high speeds, including very complex vehicle dynamics. So this is the purpose of Robo Race. Everybody, or a lot of very important companies, Google, Baidu, and many others are doing autonomy for cities and for logistics, but high-end vehicle dynamics, very few are doing, if any, at the level that we're doing with Robo Race.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Another really interesting discussion.